So before we get down to what we are talking about today, I have 2 or 3 announcements that I want to make. Announcement number 1, today is the deadline for you to submit arguments on one of the fact debate topics. I looked this morning, I counted 7, 6 arguments that were about whether clothing is a dependable indicator of personality, and 1 argument about whether Everest is the world's tallest mountain. What that means is, next week, when we have the debates, right now, if you're debating the clothing topic, there are lots of arguments you can use, and we're doing good. Next week, if we debate the Mount Everest topic, which as of now we will debate because it's the second most popular, there's 1 argument, and only for one side. So if you have not submitted arguments yet, you would be doing a great kindness to your classmates if you would look at the arguments for and against the idea that Everest is the world's tallest mountain and submit an argument for that debate. Because otherwise, the students who are chosen to debate that topic are not going to have any arguments to use. The one other thing I will say about submitting arguments, they have to come in today. The form is going to shut down and no longer accept responses because I've designed this assignment so that all of you have a full week to look at that spreadsheet, to see the arguments that are available, to become familiar with them and understand them, and then come in next week and pick one of those arguments to present when it's your turn to debate. So everybody's got to turn in their arguments before the end of today so that everybody has time to be familiar with the arguments we'll use in next week's debate. That is announcement number 1. Argument submissions, the deadline is today. Announcement number 2. We are also to the deadline for signing up for the Intelligence Squared assignment. You and your partner, you get to pick a debate you want to do your report on. When I checked this morning, there were 10 signups. Now there are 22 students in class, and each of you is doing 2 debates with 2 different partners. So when everybody has signed up, there will be 22 complete signups. But the deadline is tonight. By the time I have time, which probably will be Saturday, I'm going to look and see, and any partners who have not picked a debate, I will randomly assign you one. So if you honestly don't care which one you do, then don't worry about it. You won't be penalized. Nothing bad will happen. But if you want to choose your own debate, time is running out. Third and final announcement. This is my last lecture. Next week we're debating, and the week after that, and the week after that, and then we're having the final exam. So these essay questions we're going to look at real quick. I think that actually does not help. I think that's better. Once we get through these 3, you've got everything. And you have the next 4 weeks. Come to my office hours, send me emails. Any of these that you don't understand, make sure you understand them. We have time. Explain why people make more mistakes when they reason their way to a belief or decision without talking to anybody who disagrees. Explain why confirmation bias is not a weakness, but instead is a way of being efficient with our attention and learning. And finally, explain how online information sources like social media are breaking our ability to reach true beliefs and make good decisions. And by the end of class, I'm hoping that the answer to all of those will be pretty clear. So I want to start off by showing you a bird you may have seen before. Most people do not recognize this bird by the shape of its feet or the shape of its beak. They recognize the tail. And scientists know a lot about the tail, what the tail is made of. It's made of interlocking cells that have a special shape to them so that they reflect light. They know how the bird grows the tail. It grows it sprouts almost like hair coming out of a follicle with a protective sheath around it, and periodically it sheds its tail and has to grow a new one. That's all been observed and documented. We know how that works. One interesting question that is not what or how is why? Why does this bird have this ridiculous tail? Well, it turns out we know the answer. This is a male peacock. And when females see a bird like this, what he will do, he'll tilt the tail so that these round shapes are at a specific angle, and he'll then shake his tail. And whoever does the best job of that, the females find that very attractive. And then they form a pairing bond, and they have chicks. So that's why the bird has the ridiculous tail. This is an Asian giant hornet. 2 years ago, this was headline news in the United States because they started showing up in my part of the country, and we had never had them before. And our reporters called them murder hornets. They are the largest hornet with the largest stinger ever found on Earth. Now that stinger is so big, that hornet can sting people through a beekeeper's suit and a layer of clothing underneath. What is the stinger made of? It's been studied. How does a murder hornet or an Asian giant hornet sting? That's well understood. But the interesting question, why? Why does this hornet have a stinger so big? And there are 2 reasons. First, it uses the stinger when it's out hunting for prey. It can sting its prey and then take it home and eat it. It also uses the stinger to defend itself. If anything comes and attacks, the hornet can sting it, and whatever is attacking is likely to go away and leave the hornet alone. I hope you can see I'm warming up to an idea. This is a human being. What human beings have that makes them different from other similar life forms is the ability to reason. Better than any other mammal, better than any other primate. In our brains, we have the ability to spot patterns. We see things that repeat. We see things that belong together. We also have the ability to think about the future and the past. We have the ability to think about things that are not actually here. I could say the word helicopter, and in your imagination, you can see a helicopter. To our knowledge, other life forms can't do that. They either see it or they don't. They can't imagine it when they hear a sound that triggers the meaning, the representation. Humans can do all these things. We know how they do it. It's studied extensively. That's largely what happens in the field of psychology. But this man said we have not devoted enough attention to the question of why. Why do human beings reason? Why do human beings notice patterns, think about the future, think about abstraction? Why do human beings take information and form it into things that we believe and decisions about what we want to do? Not just how, because how we do it we've studied to death. Why do we do it? He published a book about 12 years ago, 2010. Very controversial book, got a lot of people talking. By the way, his name is, he's from France. That's pronounced Hugo Mercier. Hugo Mercier. It's easy to think that human beings reason for the sake of carrying out our daily lives. We look at situations, we decide what's going on, and that's reasoning. We come to a place where we have to make up our mind what to do, and we decide, and that's reasoning. And he says that is not what reasoning is for at all. And you completely misunderstand reasoning if you think that's what it's for. Instead, he says, reasoning only exists for talking to other people. When we reason, but we're only talking to ourselves, what we do is very unusual and also very inefficient and very ineffective. But when we reason while we talk to other people, that's its purpose. That peacock, those tails were made of feathers. Most birds have feathers to enable them to fly. If that peacock tries to use those tail feathers to fly, it's not suited to that. They're not going to fly very well. Peacocks can fly, but the tail feathers are not meant to be used for that. Human reasoning can be used for individual decisions, but it's really, really inefficient. And we're talking about this in this class because Mercier named his theory the argumentative theory of reason. The argumentative theory of reason. He made the very bold claim that your brain works the way it does, not so you can make up your own mind, but so you can change other people's minds. Because this is my last lecture, I want to say today, I am not trying to send you away understanding everything. Today is about shaking up your understanding and giving you something to continue to think about. All right, what we chiefly do, we spot details, we interpret them, and we put them together like you're putting together a puzzle. And if you have ever been working to put together a puzzle and you're stuck and you can't solve this puzzle, but all of a sudden 2 or 3 pieces fit together and you start to think you have a solution, human beings have a bad habit of wanting the solution to be the right one and of ignoring anything that might tip them off that their solution is the wrong one. A good example of this is police officers who are trying to investigate a crime. They'll find a suspect, they'll find 2 or 3 clues that say that the suspect is guilty. And almost immediately, they start ignoring or even hiding evidence that might suggest that they've got the wrong person. The first few clues we find, we tend to get tipped in the direction of thinking we've got something we can use. And then we don't step back and consider the possibility we might be wrong. So, if I were to ask a weird question, if I were to say, point to your memory, where is your memory? It's funny, a student sitting about halfway back just actually came up with the answer I was looking for. A lot of you might point to your head, say, my memory is here. But I wonder how many of you would point to your phone. If I were to say, point to your problem solving, where is your problem solving? Again, you might get tempted to point here. This is where I solve problems. But it might be just as good of an idea to point to the people around you. If a doctor has a plugged up toilet or a faucet that doesn't work, that doctor needs to call a plumber. And if a plumber is sick, that plumber needs to go to a doctor. So a lot of our problem solving, we have to turn to other people's expertise. And if I asked one last weird question, if I said, point to where you figure out what to believe and what to do, Hugo Mercier would say you ought to be pointing to other people. Because you make your best decisions about what to believe and your best decisions about what choice to make when someone who disagrees with you forces you to come up with really good reasons. Because anytime you don't talk to someone who disagrees with you, the reasons you come up with will be really, really, really bad. All right. Here is a test to demonstrate what he's talking about. It is a classic test. It's been around since the 1960s. It's called the Wasson Selection Test. The Wasson Selection Test. I'm going to put a rule up here, written out rule. Well, I'll just show you. This is the rule. Imagine I dealt out 4 cards, and the rule is, if a card has an even number on one side, the other side of the card must be red. And when I deal out the cards in front of you, your only job is to tell me which cards do you have to turn over to decide whether that rule has been obeyed. I'm going to step back and let you read the rule very carefully. I'm going to be quiet for about 30 seconds while you do that. And if we did the Wasson selection task, I would then deal out that. Have you had enough time to decide which cards you would turn over, or do you want a few more seconds to think about it? The correct answer to this task, you would need to turn that card over and that card. If you flip that card over and it's red, that's okay. The rule says nothing about what's on the other side of a red card. It just says an even number on one side means the other side must be red. You have to flip this one because if you flip it and it's orange, this rule has been broken. You have to flip this one because if you flip it and there's an even number, this rule has been broken. A lot of people get tempted to flip this one. But nothing about that rule says what has to be on the other side of a red card. When this experiment has been done with large numbers of people from all walks of life, between 75 and 90% of people get it wrong. Because those instructions tip them in favor of thinking, well, that is the rule. All I have to do is confirm that it's been followed. But that's not what the task asked. It said, make sure it's being followed. And we want so badly, something in our thinking tips us in the direction of, if we think we know what's going on, we will only look for information that confirms that we are right. Here's another way to think about it. Imagine you build a bridge. And you are very proud of your bridge, and it's about to open for the first time for traffic to drive across it. Now, on the one hand, you could say, that bridge is ready for traffic. Let's have a few things cross it. Let's have a little K car drive across it. Let's have some people on bicycles drive across it. You see, they got across just fine. I knew I built a good bridge. On the other hand, you might say, let's check and make sure that bridge is safe. Let's take the biggest trucks we can, load them with the heaviest weights possible, drive them across slowly, and watch to see if there are cracks or if the bridge is shimmying. If you believe in safety, you would test the bridge. What we don't do with our beliefs, we don't test them. We look for more proof that they're right. So now, what Mercier says, what Hugo Mercier says, most of our beliefs and most of our decisions about our own individual behavior come from intuition. Now, I put intuition into the glossary, so there's a definition of it. There's also my best guess at the Japanese translation of it. But let me spend a moment on intuition. Whenever you suddenly know something, but you can't really say why you know it, if you've ever met someone and the first time you meet them you think, oh, we're going to be friends. You don't know that you have anything in common with them. You don't know that they're a nice person. There's just an instant click. That's intuition. Or you go to a restaurant and you think, oh, this is not a good fit. This was not a good choice. And there's nothing you can really tell, but it just sort of occurs to you. That's intuition. And what Mercier's been able to demonstrate is a whole lot of decisions we make for ourselves At the moment we make them, we don't have any reasons for them. We only begin to talk about the reasons for our beliefs and our behaviors afterward, when we have to talk to somebody else. The clothes you put on today, the food you choose at your next meal, what you do with a little free time whenever you have it, if you have any. Those things very often, if someone asked, why did you do that? You might just say, I don't know, felt like it. I don't know, it just seemed like a good idea. Those are intuitions. But the thing is, other people do not typically experience our intuitions. You meet someone and you instantly think, oh, we're going to be friends. You don't know that they feel that. So what we do is we begin talking in reasons when someone asks us why. We begin explaining our reasoning because other people do not share our intuition. That brings us to another term that Mercier has a lot to say about, rationalization. Rationalization is making up a reason for what you did after you did it. At lunch today, I don't even know what the name of it is, but it was a fairly light meal. And right now, I might say, standing in front of you, I chose that because I knew I had to teach class right after, and a light meal is good, so I'll be alert, and I won't be sleepy. That's not why I chose it at the time. But I'll make up a reason after the fact if I have to explain it to somebody else. So we think logically, primarily. I got one step ahead of myself. So another line of Mercier's research, pretty fascinating. We suddenly become very tuned to logic when we listen to other people, when they give us their explanations. And we get really, really good at identifying flaws in their logic. And a number of his studies he's actually done with very small children, 3- and 4-year-olds. And even they can spot when someone's explanation has a big logical hole in it. So do we naturally reason, assemble evidence, make logical decisions? We do it, we don't do it naturally. But do we recognize illogical explanations from other people? Yes, we recognize it. We spot flaws. The best explanation for why we do this is when you are thinking about your own beliefs or your own decisions, you're too close to it. You're stuck in the middle of it. The stakes are very high. You're involved. If you ever get into the study of persuasion, there's been a lot of work done on involvement. How involved is the person you're trying to persuade? If they're not very involved, they may be easy to persuade. If they're highly involved, it may be much harder to persuade them. Should the government raise college tuition at public colleges? Make a good argument? You might say, yeah, it would make sense. Should the government or should tuition be raised at smaller private colleges for women? You're involved in that. That has more of an impact on your life. It makes it a very different situation. There's a whole body of research into what we call, when you hear information, what is your goal? What is your objective? What outcome do you want? And there are two sets of goals. Sometimes there are accuracy goals. You want to understand the information to get to the right answer. But then there are directional goals. Directional goals are there is an answer that you hope is correct. Now that's a bunch of gibberish, but I can explain to you one study that I think will make sense out of it. It's one of the simplest but most ingenious studies I have ever heard of. It was conducted in 1987 by a researcher at Carleton University in Canada. Here's what she did. She took a short newspaper article that said, consuming a lot of caffeine, drinking a lot of drinks with caffeine in them, has certain health hazards. It can give women fibroid masses in their breast tissue that is very, very painful. And then she had a large sample, about 2,000 participants read this article, and she asked them 3 questions. First, do you believe the information in that article? Second, Do you consider yourself a heavy or light caffeine drinker? Third, are you male or female? And what she found was men said, yes, I trust the article. Women who said that they were light caffeine drinkers said, yes, I trust the article. And women who were heavy caffeine drinkers said, no, I don't think that's true. Same article, same explanations. One group said, I don't think that's true. Because that one group had a directional goal. They did not want to think that caffeine was hurting them or might cause them pain. The other groups, the men, they had an accuracy goal. Oh, that's interesting, but they weren't involved in it. That's the best explanation we have for why we're really good at spotting flaws in other people's logic. But when we are reasoning about our own beliefs or about our own decisions, we make really, really irrational, weak arguments. One other bit of research Mercier draws on. We do much better when we take our perceptions and compare them with one another. When we take our observations or our perceptions and we pool what we have noticed with what other people have noticed. I might show you a big jar of jelly beans, and I might ask all of you, guess how many jelly beans are in the jar. This is not a very big sample. There are only 15 of you. But if this were the largest lecture hall on this campus and it were full, and we did it, and everybody turned in the number they thought it was, the result that's been demonstrated over and over again is, if I averaged all the answers, it would be closer to the right answer than any individual. The average from all of you would be the closest. When we pool what we observe, we tend to become more accurate. Now, one of Mercier's studies I thought was pretty fascinating. It's one of the ones I posted as a recommended reading, because he did this study here in Japan. He first ran the study in Israel, and what he did in the study, he had all of his participants get together in pairs. So you might look around, and maybe you have one classmate you would do this experiment with if you had been in his study. He showed them a zoo animal. And first, he had them, without talking to each other, write down what they thought it weighed. Then, he had them look at one another's answers, without talking, and write down again what they thought it weighed. Then, he had them talk to each other and discuss it, and then write down what they thought it weighed. And then, after they separated, and in that third one, they had to agree on the answer. They wrote down what they agreed it weighed. And then fourth and finally, he had them individually write down, what do you think this hippopotamus weighs? Now, in Israel, they got more accurate every time. First guess, not very close. Second guess, looking at their partner, closer. Third guess, very, very close. And interestingly, the fourth guess, the Israeli participants did not improve, but the Japanese participants did. First guess, not very close. Second guess, look at your partner, a little bit closer. Third guess, talk to each other, agree on an answer, and write it down. But in the fourth guess, they were more accurate still. And Mercier concluded that with the Japanese participants, when they were talking to their partner, they would have reservations. They would think to themselves privately, I don't think this is exactly right, but I don't want to make disharmony with my partner. So whatever answer they worked out, they'd write down. But then when allowed to answer one more time, they would write down their answer and it got even more accurate. All of that to say, when you check what you perceive against what other people perceive, maybe all your life you've known that it's a good idea to check your perceptions. What this is showing us is the social science and rigorously collected data confirm. Check your perceptions with what other people perceive because it tends to improve the quality. So then one of the more controversial claims Mercier made, and it's one of the essay questions. As a matter of fact, I think it's the second essay question. Confirmation bias. Confirmation bias describes the pattern of behavior where we decide we have the right answer and then we only look for information that confirms it. We don't look for information that challenges it. Mercier says that's not a weakness. It's not a flaw in our thinking. Instead, it's us being efficient. Imagine that for any strong belief you had, well, for the strong beliefs you already have, I imagine you know a lot about the subject matter. You probably, if you discussed it, you could come out with some reasons why you believe it. And you probably could explain those reasons if challenged. Now imagine that what you had to do was you had to go out and find every opposing reason and every variation on every opposing reason. So maybe a few years from now, when you're out of college, maybe you're planning on commuting to work every day in a car, and you have reasons that you want to commute in a car. Now imagine that for you to be confident of that decision, you also had to think through all the reasons to commute by bicycle, all the reasons to commute by train, all the reasons to stay home and do telework and order things online, all the reasons to commute on foot. You had to understand all of them, be able to explain all of them, and only then could you be confident in your decision to commute by car. Mercier goes through all of that to say, the part where you test your beliefs, you remember what I said before about point to your problem solving? Point to the people around you. Because you can find people who do think bicycles are better, and they've thought deeply about it. And they know the reasons why, and they can explain them if pressed. So you go and you talk to them. And they give you the reasons that driving may not be the best way to commute. And in that process and listening to them, something interesting happens. Interesting to us in a debate class. It is not the case that they change your mind and you say, oh, I must be wrong, I'll get a bicycle instead. What you do is you start improving your reasons. If you only have to come up with a good enough reason to back up a decision you've already made, you like the idea of owning a car, you've always thought cars were cool, so you need a reason to buy a car. Well, it'll get me to work and it's quick. But if someone starts to say, but here are the reasons bicycles are better, what you're naturally given the opportunity to do is to start to say, well, but cars are better than bicycles because. And your friend might say, well, but here are the downsides of cars. And you might say, well, I'll get a car that does this. Cars are not very safe. They have crashes. I'll get a car with good safety equipment. Cars are not very safe if you're sleepy because you might fall asleep behind the wheel. Well, I'll do this to make sure that I'm safe while I'm driving. And your argument gets better and better because it becomes more and more focused. Your reasons improve when someone outside of you is disagreeing with them. And that is how Mercier built his theory that the reason that we make arguments is in the process of giving and taking. We sharpen our arguments. We heighten the quality of our arguments until we make truly rational decisions. This, by the way, is ancient. This is why corporations are headed up by boards of directors. Anyone in organizational science, in business, will tell you a large corporation headed up by one person is a disaster waiting to happen. This is why presidents have cabinets and prime ministers have cabinets. Why lots of decision makers are in on decisions. This is why judges in the higher levels of courts, why there tend to be multiple judges. Because that's the way you improve deliberation. Each one of them will advocate for one position, and they'll continue to sharpen and sharpen their case for that position as other people disagree. The disagreement is the way the reasoning is improved. So, Mercier's claim is actually very, very specific. He says, this is not about simple decisions. This is not about if you itch and you're trying to decide, well, what am I going to do about that? Should I scratch it? You know, dogs can figure out what to do when they itch. He says it's also not about highly controversial decisions. It's not about things like abortion in the United States, or the death penalty, or the role of the military here in Japan. It's not about things that are polarizing, where people get angry if the subject is even raised. But it's about things that are very pragmatic. Complicated, but pragmatic. If governments are trying to decide how to spend their budget, if school systems are trying to decide what should our approach be to help an entire population of students learn, those should be debated, and debated energetically. Because the reasoning that people will give at the beginning of the discussion is not nearly as good as the reasoning people will arrive at if they have to answer people who disagree. And all of this actually comes with a warning. I don't typically teach in the area of communication studies that has to do with broadcast, that has to do with mass media. A lot of the mass media research in the field of communication has to do with why is the mass media, why is news reporting as messed up as it is? And the answer to that always has to begin with, if things make money, people will keep doing them. So, if you notice that news programming is always about things that are scary, and tends to be about people fighting, and tends to make you feel worse after you watch it, it's not that the people who make the news are evil, they're not. But they have children to raise, and they have rent to pay, they need to make money. And they've discovered, if that's what they broadcast, people will keep tuning in. Broadcast is not actually the most powerful medium for communication these days. Online communication outlets like social networks, like YouTube, they make more money if you spend more time looking at their content. And their algorithms that they have programmed into the platform have determined that if they keep showing you things you agree with, if they keep turning you to people who say things that you agree with, you'll watch longer, you'll keep coming back and consuming that. In the time of my parents and in the time when I was growing up, you had limited options when it came to how you got your information about the world. And what that meant was, you were constantly confronted with people who had different opinions. You knew what the opinions were, you knew the reasons behind them. But the online communication outlets increasingly will feed you a steady diet of people who agree with you. And now think through Mercier's model of how argument works. If the only thing you hear is people giving you more and more reasons that you already agree with, and you never hear anybody who disagrees with you, and you start off giving the weakest version of a reason that you can, and nobody ever disagrees with you, your reasons never get any better. And as a matter of fact, the agreements can get so intense that they become distorted. And that is one of the leading models right now for where conspiracy theories come from. Too much hyper-concentrated agreements and too little exposure to the viewpoints of people who disagree. So, you should beware of people who want to give you more reasons to believe or to behave the way you already do. Instead, if you want to make good decisions, what you ought to do, find an intelligent and respectful person who thinks you're wrong, and talk with them and really listen and try to find out why they think you're wrong. And then start giving them your side of it. Start improving your case for your belief or your decision and see what they think. And do that consistently. And that's the way, according to Mercier. And this 12-year-old book of his, a whole lot of people in his field, which is psychology, they all say he's really on to something. This does seem to be why human beings have the ability to reason. That we sharpen it, not when we run the reasons round and round in our own heads, but when we talk to other people and we have to make it through the objections they raise. All right. The one last thing I wanted to do has not that much to do with what we have talked about in the first 40 minutes of class. But I said today I did not want to send you away with all the answers. I wanted to shake up your thinking. And I have one more thing I want to do that may help shake up your thinking. I told you at the first class meeting that I was a debate coach, and I was. I was a competitive debater, and then I coached debate. And when we would go to the places where the debate tournaments were being held, those were not the only contests being held on campus. Where you found debate, you would also find competitive public speaking. And you would find a third category of contest called oral interpretation of literature. And where there was oral interpretation of literature, you could see people doing monologues that were cut from a play. You could see people reading excerpts from a short story or novel. The monologues were called dramatic interpretation. The excerpts from the play, from the novel or the short story, were called prose interpretation. And you could see poetry interpretation. And the poems were sometimes one long poem, usually not. Usually, they were several poems put together. And I have to admit, I saw a few of the performances of poetry, and I had no idea what was going on. Absolutely no idea. And when I was the head debate coach at Arizona State University, which I was for 2 years, the first year I was there, Arizona State had the national champion in poetry interpretation. And I would watch her perform and I would say, okay, it's powerful. I still don't understand how this is a contest. How do you judge this? What is this? And what I want to do right now, and it does belong in an argumentation class, be patient with me. I want to show you, not my student years ago who won nationals because I don't have a video of her, but a student from 3 years ago. She was in the finals of nationals, and I'm going to show you her performance from the finals of nationals. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to tie it to an argument class. And then we will spend the balance of our time with you asking me anything you need to ask me about the upcoming debates or the exam. But for now, give me about 30 seconds to switch over and get the AV working, and then we're going to watch some poetry. Quit that. Boom. Boom. There we are. Okay. There you are. Okay, before I start this, she's going to use some language that's very vulgar. She's going to talk about some things that are probably a little upsetting. And it's going to be fairly loud. But it's good stuff.
We meet for the first time in the backyard of my childhood playhouse. That is to say, my parents were playing house while my little brother fluffed and pulled at my pretty pigtail until I threw him into the fire pit, but it wasn't lit. But my mother still rushed to his rescue while he whimpered and whined. She's trading feminism for motherhood again. He's just doing it to get a rise out of you, she says. Well, congratulations. I have risen. At the party, the only other girl is ranting about the audience, a sea of rape jokes, snapbacks, styrofoam cups, and me. I shoot her an empathetic glance. Say nothing. This house is for wallpaper. And what good is wallpaper that speaks? 5 things I would like to tell every teenage girl. 1. The world is trying to kill you. It will try to do this by stealing your voice. Kill it back. We've been raising our voices against men again. Don't tell us to smile, agree not to clap back to make them more comfortable. We are angry women here to outrage you, outwork you, outmaneuver you. The big bulls call us grumpy bitches. We bleed red, ready for battle. Come, fight. Because we're coming. 1992 was the year of the woman. A record number of 28 women were elected to Congress. Flash forward to 2018, over 100 women blazed their way into that same office. Vox of November 8, 2018 explains the spark in both 1992 and 2018. Female rage. Maxine Waters, Nancy Pelosi, Ilhan Omar, all women who made headlines this last year, not just for their political accomplishments, but their rage. Men like Mitch McConnell, Donald Trump, and Brett Kavanaugh attempt to diminish the political accomplishments of these women by equating their passion to nothing more than fits or tantrums, because they know female rage enacts unprecedented change. And USA Today of October 8, 2018 furthers, older white men should no longer get the luxury of making demeaning remarks. For so long, women have been conditioned by society, so they rarely let themselves publicly explode. They assert, we must do it more. Through the poetry, 9 Things I Would Like to Tell Every Teenage Girl by Melissa Newman Evans, Raging Woman by Melanie Day, Pocket-Sized Feminism by Blake Baird, Hero by Regina LeBeau, and A Prayer for the Men Who Have Forsaken Tender Things by Shea Alexie Stewart. A program. My rage is not a performative choice. It's a survival mechanism. Call us angry in 2018. This year we'll show you a riot. We have waited centuries for the men of this system to make way for the women. At 78, Nancy Pelosi's life has prepared her for this battle of wills. We'll cut your head off and you won't even know you're bleeding. Rashida Tlaib refuses to back down from explicit remarks. Impeach the motherfucker Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez straight from the Bronx. Let's bust. Boys, these boys. I want to stand up, but what if he takes my seat? These boys, I want to stand up, but what if everyone notices I've been sitting here this whole time? I'm tired of keeping my feminism in my pocket until it's convenient for me. Once, on an escalator, a man stuck his hand up my skirt. But no one around me said or did anything, so I didn't say or do anything. I didn't want to make a scene. And suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of me. People found me more interesting when my mouth stopped moving. After all, who doesn't like a nice, quiet, tender thing? So when you ask me where my voice is gone or why my birch wood tongue has forgotten routing, please give me time to remember the subway. 19 and pessimistic enough to carry covers, right? When a man walks in and says, you look like you need to loosen up, says he can help. And you say, the only thing you'd like to loosen up is his jawbone. Why'd you have to be such a bitch about it? And I wonder, if this motherfucker knows I already killed him 6 times in my head with the various weapons I keep on my person. This is just icing on the cake. The best compliment he could have given me that I look like a rabid dog, ready to rage, ready to rip out someone's throat, ready to taste blood and regret and everything else that it means to be a woman and being a prisoner to your own vocal cords. To watch the world want to see a muzzle instead of your mouth. And I know that angry is not a big enough word for these men who have never spoken to God. Perhaps man made a God that looked like him so he could feel good about forgiveness. For if God were a queer femme, since God is a queer femme, they know they will never be worthy of her grace, and yet she gives it anyway. 5. Wear whatever you want. Look however you want. You know who can fuck themselves if they don't like it? Everyone. But once I told a boy I was powerful, and he told me I slapping my ass. I drenched my boss in desperation because I need this job, because I lost too many others, because I have to control her or else they will stake this beast in my chest 6. You remember that metaphor about the world wanting to kill you and steal your voice? Well, sometimes this world will actually try to kill you. It will never be your fault. You will never deserve it. Trying to prepare you is pointless. Trying to prepare you is just another way to blame you when it happens, which is why 7. You have to hold up your sisters. Everyone is your sister. The world is trying to kill each and every one of you, and if you do not hold one another up, nobody else will watch us. Watch us channel all of the angry women spinning with the animosity of your sexist transgressions. We'll sulk in this anger until you must bow at our feet. We are not afraid to raise our voices. We'll not rest until we break the last ceiling. Come at me. Bring the big guns. I am the sword. Get set on you. They are afraid of what she can do. Of what she has already done, even in a cage, even in a dress, even under a glass ceiling. You feel her fire scorching. Her smoke filling your lungs, but you know what they want to do. Lock it in a room, label it crazy, dangerous rage. Woman, I want them to kneel before her. I want them to power as she unfurls herself. Centuries of drowning us in rivers, of stroking our sisters, of defiling us behind dumpsters. This dragon has enough revenge in her stomach to attend your funeral. Save the misogyny from your bones, for every woman who has ever had to burn her way forward when the divine God says, this is how you take in air despite every time it has been taken out of you. And today, I do not break my body for you. Today, I am not your savior today. I scream hysterically and uncontrollably. I scream, I scream. Die? Oh, I do not die.
So I wanted you to experience that. I understand it may have been a little bit overwhelming. What I plan to do after class is to give you the link if you want to watch it on your own time. I also have a transcript if you want to read every word she said. That'll be available later. But years ago, I saw a performance, not that one, another one, comparably powerful, and one of my assistant coaches, not an assistant debate coach, but an assistant speech coach, said, "That's an argument." I said, "Really?" I, at that point, had finished all the coursework on a doctorate in argumentation, and I couldn't see how that was an argument. And she said, "I'm not making it up. When we teach new people coming into this competition, when we teach them how to do it, we teach them this is an argument." If you go back to the Toulmin model, claim, grounds, warrant. About a minute and a half into her performance, she closed the book. She talked about 1992 was the year of the woman, 2018 was another year of the woman, and she explained that this program was about female rage. And there were 2 moments. There was a moment near the end of the introduction when she said, women have been told not to explode, but we need to do it more often. That was her claim. That was the argument this entire performance made. What were the grounds? You remember we defined grounds as what's the evidence that's independent of the speaker that the people receiving the argument can evaluate for themselves. And she performed all those women in different situations, and the audience listening to her, they could identify. A lot of the women in the room had been in similar situations. A lot of men in the room had observed or been told by people that they knew about similar situations. So that storytelling, as performed poetically, those were the grounds. And what was the warrant? The claim was women need to explode more often. The grounds were This is what women experience. And the warrant was the moment in her introduction when she said, female rage enacts unprecedented change. Now, I tell you that because you're not going to have to fight off sleep while I'm up here talking about argument anymore, but we've only had about 5 weeks to do this. I've only had enough time to give you the beginnings of a few ideas so you can go looking for arguments beyond this class when the class is over. When I teach longer classes on argumentation that have a lot more meetings, we talk about a lot of different things that are arguments. We talk about arguments that are purely visual, photos that argue, music that argues, architecture that argues, anything where you can tell what the message is because there is a very clear claim. You can connect the claim up with something that's independent of the communicator that you can see for yourself, and those are the grounds. And then you can see the relationship between the claim and the grounds is a sound one. Those grounds really do support that claim. And you have the opportunity, you or someone else, to argue back. We move through arguments all over the place. And so that's an argument that I wanted you to see, so you don't walk out of here thinking that argument is nothing but the Toulmin model repeated over and over again. Now that does not mean, and I'm about to be silly, that does not mean you should come in next week and scream at the top of your lungs like she did. What we're going to do in the debates is going to be a lot more simple, elementary, comfortable arguments. But argument takes a lot of forms. It is about 1:57. You may be able to tell already we're not going the full 90 minutes today. I am in my mid-50s and a full professor. I get to let out class early if I want to. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the floor now. Well, and actually, let me put the visuals back up to do one more thing. Because as I said at the beginning of class, near the very end of class, the very last class meeting, we are going to have the final exam. So as we've done at the end of every class meeting so far, let's look at these again. Why do people make more mistakes when they reason their way to a belief or decision without talking to anyone who disagrees? Because we come up with the weakest version of our argument. And as a matter of fact, when we make our own decisions or beliefs, we don't come up with arguments at all. We do it on intuition. And if you just have to explain it to somebody, and it's somebody who already agrees with you, you come up with a weak version of your argument. And when you have to talk about it with someone who disagrees, your argument gets better and better, because you have to strengthen it in the face of what they say. Secondly, why is confirmation bias, according to Hugo Mercier, not a weakness, but a way of being efficient with your attention and your learning? If you wanted to be immune to confirmation bias, you'd have to know everything about not only what you think, but about every possible way of challenging what you think, and human beings just can't do it. We have to store that knowledge, the knowledge of other positions, in other people. But it then means we have to talk to other people, and we have to go straight toward the ones who disagree. That's how you fend off confirmation bias. You can't hold enough information to do it individually. And third and finally, how online information sources like social media are breaking our ability to reach true beliefs and make good decisions. Because it becomes easy to the point of being automatic to hear from people who already agree with us. Because that's what social media force feed us. It becomes much harder work to find people who disagree and then to have a really good discussion with them and find out the best reasons against what you want to do or what you want to believe. Okay, now it is 1:59, about to turn 2. I'm going to open the floor. We have an exam coming up with these essay questions and the other ones, and we have debates next week. What do you want to ask me about any of that? Yes, ma'am.
I want to check the topic of next week's debate. So is the Everest is not the world's biggest mountain will be the next week's topic?
As of right now, we only have arguments so far on the clothing topic and Mount Everest. The deadline, that form is going to shut at 5 p.m. If we only have, or if the top two, as far as what we have arguments for, are those two, those will be the topics. If suddenly a bunch of you submit arguments about the Northern Kingdom, then that will become the second topic. I don't think that's very likely, but if it interests you, please submit the arguments. We'll have the debate.
So I just
Okay.
submit one argument.
Okay.
If I want to change the second popular topic, so can I just submit my form again?
Yeah, if you wanted to volunteer and submit more arguments, you're free to. You're only required to, for the grade, submit one time. But if you can think of other arguments that nobody else has yet submitted, or on a topic nobody's submitted, feel free. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Are there other questions about debating, about the exam, about the Intelligence Squared report? Has everybody connected up with their partners by now? I hope. Oh dear. Maybe if I leave you the last few minutes of class, could you productively find your partners? That might be good. All right. If you feel confident you know what's going on, then class is dismissed. Go find your partners and get the Intelligence Squared thing going, and come ask me questions after class if you didn't want to do it in front of everybody. See you next week with you ready to debate.